I exited out through the door, and I got back on my bike, and I pedaled my bike back to the truck, and I drove back to the mountain house. And I was still completely freaking out, and it felt entirely surreal. But there is a big difference in how I felt, in that as soon as I left the house, I felt the most enormous wave of relief wash over me, because I knew from that moment on, Aida would be safe. Aida would be safe from the sexual abuse that her mother was perpetrating on her. And there is proof to that the state is hiding from you.
You're all right. Instruct him to be quiet. Okay. You stop talking.
Yeah, we're going to hear what led up to that today, because it was explosive to say the least, and you're not going to want to miss a thing. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Now that you can hear me. Yes, you saw it. We're going to talk about what led up to that. I wanted to lead with that because I don't want you to miss it in case you can't watch to the end. But watch to the end, because this man is going to give something I have never seen on the witness stand. I was flabbergasted. Like, I've seen a lot of trials. I've been doing this for 3, 4, 5 years now. Plus, I was a trial attorney. I've never seen anybody get up on the stand and sincerely and with believability and credibility describe his crime. Confession to the crime in front of the jury. And with complete disregard for some prior rulings by the judge. So this was Zachary Hughs. You just saw Zachary Hughs. He's on trial in the state of South Carolina for the alleged murder of Christina Purcell on October 13th of 2021. Brad Post comes over to check on her, finds that she is deceased. She's been stabbed 35 times. And they quickly figure out through ring camera footage that they obtained surveilling the neighborhood and investigative work that it is Zach Hughs. So Zach is arrested, and now we get this trial. And the jury has been totally confused up to this point, because they saw the boyfriend, Brad Post, come in an orange jumpsuit to testify about how he found the body. So now, well, they know he's in custody. They know he is charged with a crime. They don't know what the crime is. They do now. I'll tell you what, they do now. So Zach decides he's going to take the stand. And he was on the stand all day. So I'm going to run through his testimony pretty as quickly as I can, because like I said, he was on the stand all day. He's 32 years old. He's unmarried. He found out early on in life that he has an aptitude for music. So his father went out and bought him a piano for $300 from a yard sale. And he started playing piano. He said he grew up in a Christian household. He has a good morale, and he believes to serve his life in support of others. So he was living in California. That's where he was born, and his family moved to Virginia, bought a 3.5-acre farm. And this is because his family wanted him and his brother to learn the value of hard work. So they joined a church, and in 2005, this church sent out this email that there's this family of 5 kids, 4 kids, 5 kids, I don't know, five kids from Russia that are orphaned and they need a home. So he said his family prayed over it and they talked about it. And they said, if we don't do it, who's going to do it? So they decide they're going to adopt this family. More on that later. So the ages of these children that were adopted were between 18 months and 10 years. They had names already, but they were changed to American names when they got here. The oldest they called Grace. And we're going to hear a lot about Grace. So at the age of 15 to 16 years old, his family moves to Greenville, and he started playing the piano at age 9 and was to the point where even by the age of 14, he was practicing 6 to 8 hours a day, mostly, after school. He was homeschooled, so it did allow him a lot of time for practice. But he quickly learned he wanted to pursue music as a career. And his father even modified their garage to make it soundproof so he wouldn't bother the neighbors when he was practicing. So he won some prestigious local competitions, festivals, and then he won first prize in an international competition, which allowed him, or the prize was he got to perform a full concerto with the South Carolina Philharmonic Orchestra. So he decided to go to Juilliard School of Music in New York, and he applied, and only 7.2% of people who apply to get in there actually get in there, and he was one of them, and actually got a full ride scholarship, merit-based scholarship, and generous financial aid, he said. So he started that in the fall of 2011 and graduated in May of 2015 with a Bachelor's of Music and Piano Performance. I didn't even know there was such a thing. That's pretty cool. So at first, he decides he doesn't want to pursue a higher degree. He wants to do some freelancing, playing here and there, some teaching, and he also worked in a restaurant to support his income. Then in 2017, a staff position opened up for the Knoxville, Tennessee Symphony Orchestra, a position for principal performance, principal keyboardist. So he got the position, and that ended in 2018. At that point, he decided, I want to enlist in the Marines. He wanted to do something different, something that would challenge him. So when he went to the recruiter, he found out because he had a bachelor's degree, he's eligible for officer training. So that's the route he decided to go. They wanted to lean him towards the route of military band. He's like, I didn't want to play in the band. I wanted to be challenged. I wanted to be, what do they call it? Infantry. I wanted to be infantry. And I chose the Marines because I knew it would be a really tough and a challenge. So 3 weeks into officer training, and he's dropped from the class because although he said he was at the top of his class, the top percentage of the class, I don't know how you know that after 3 weeks, but okay, we'll go with that. But he had multiple stress fractures in both of his tibias. So he goes to South Carolina. He's dropped out. The recruiter says, come back when you're rehabilitated. We'll get you back in. And that was his plan. So he goes back to South Carolina, back home with his parents, and decides he continues his rehabilitation. But at this point, he meets a woman named Jeanette Wynn. The Wynns are the one that owned the mountain home that he stayed in right before the murder. They also owned the home where the bicycle was. They were out of town at the time of the murder. But Jeanette Wynn had invited him to play in their church at an inaugural concert. They had bought this they had a donation of this very, very rare piano. It has an extra 9 keys. It is, a $250,000 instrument. They said, would you come play for us at this inaugural concert? And he's like, yeah, I'll do that. So, but he had to start practicing again, So that was in June of 2019. And he developed a friendship with this family, and they said, you can move in with us, because they enjoyed listening to him practice. So he moved in there. And so he said Beethoven was a personal hero of his, and it was Beethoven's 200th birthday in 2020. So he had this idea that he would play all 32 of Beethoven's concertos by memory in a series of concerts. And he was asked, how many pages of music is that? Over 600 pages he was going to memorize and play the series of concerts. Total time it would take you to play that, 11 to 12 hours. So at this time, he's like, I got to choose. Do I go with this passion project of playing these concertos, or do I go back in the military? He chose the passion project. And then he was asked, how many people have ever done that, played all 32 Beethoven's concertos by memory? And he says, very few. He says, there's less than a dozen that are recorded. I don't know if he meant by memory that were recorded or just people that have actually played all 32 that have recorded them. Anyway, not very many people. So the performance took place at the Winds Church, and that was in January of 2020. So that was his first concert, where he played 3 of the concertos. Then in February 2020, he played 2 more. Then in March of 2020, you know where I'm going with this, right? He played 3 more. Guess what happens in April? COVID. You know what happens in April of 2020? COVID. There goes all the performances. No more public gatherings at that point. So he was working at a place called Gianna's and assisting his dad with bricklaying and painting houses to have an income. So he saved up enough money. He bought this portable electronic keyboard with the best he could find, because he wanted it to sound good when he played his music. And he got a permit to play in the streets. So he was out playing in the streets, his music. When in August of 2020, outside of a place called Spill the Beans, that's so cool, that name, John Mello and his then 8-year-old daughter come up to him, and John says, my daughter's favorite song is Claire de Lune. Can you play it? So he plays it. Then they strike up a conversation. The daughter, he said, was completely caught up in the music. He says, most kids that age are running around when I'm playing. They're not paying attention. But he says this really made an impression on him, that she was so really into this music. So John gives him a business card, and he got the impression that John was into rock and roll music, not piano music, that he was in the rock and roll world. And he said, I hadn't had much contact with that world, but he says, I thought John was a very charismatic person, outgoing, great conversationalist. So I wanted to have some coffee with him. So they met up 6 or 7 times for coffee. And he says, with the exception of one occasion, his daughter was always with him. They would have coffee. They would go to pizza. They went to an art gallery. He felt like the daughter was very mature, cultured, well-traveled, very healthy and loved, and that John Mello was a great father. On October 2nd, which was Zach's birthday, Christina Parcell had custody and had taken a road trip to Alabama with the daughter. So he and John Mello go out to celebrate Zach's birthday. They go out, they have drinks, they're in a festive mood. Then they end the night by going to these taco stands that are pretty popular and have tacos. And he said at this point, his mood starts to shift and he becomes very pensive, and started telling him that he's having grave concerns about his daughter. So John tells him that, when they get back, I'm taking her to go to Italy. And he does. So he leaves and goes to Italy. And at this point, Zach starts planning to restart his concert series. and needs to start focusing on that. But instead of performing it live, he was going to be recording it. He met another person that could help him do this recordings. And so he started practicing, and then he was recording once a week, these different concertos. So he said the communication between him and John early on during that Italy stay was not frequent until about April of 2021, when John says they've taken the daughter, she's gone back with her mother. What am I going to do? So it's at this point that Zach decides he wants to do whatever he can to help John. He gets him a lawyer. He is forwarded all these documents from John, including the photos, the web URLs, all of that stuff, so that he can make the Guardian and different people aware of what's going on, hoping that John can get custody back of his daughter. But he said to the jury, in order to understand why I was helping, you need to understand about my sister Grace, who was 10 when they got them. First of all, they adopted these kids from Russia, they all had shaved heads from lice. They were apparently horribly abused by whoever their parents were in Russia, but the jury is not allowed to hear that. But we know that the 10-year-old mentally was pretty messed up. He describes her as the most evil human being he ever met in his life. She was amoral, no sense of right or wrong, masterful manipulator, would lie at the drop of a hat, invent gruesome stories, and would tell them like she was making a sandwich. It was like no big deal. And he said she was like a vampire. She just sucked the goodness and the life out of everybody that she came into contact with, and was trying to, pass this along to her siblings. So she was actually removed from the family. So he made a comment that Christina, what John was telling him about Christina, made him believe that Christina was very much, what John was describing was very much what he had gone through with his sister Grace, what John was going through with Christina. And he said there were three very pertinent collections of information that he got from John. One was all these photos. And he says, these weren't just, cute photos you'd send to your boyfriend, cute nudes. He says these were, the ones you do in front of the mirror, you give them a peek. No, he says, no, these were lewd, tasteless, and very clear, had sort of an advertising element to it. And John had said that these were from her previous career as a prostitute. He also had access to a deposition that was taken in 2016. Now, he wanted to read from the deposition, and that got shut down. So he was allowed to talk about what his mindset was after reading the deposition. And he said, after I read the depo, he realized that she had a history of manipulating men to get money by offering them sex. She went on a web page called Sugar Daddy for Me and would solicit older men. And she had acted and produced in pornographic films. This was all stuff he gleaned from the deposition that Christina gave. And that she was not interested in having children at this time is why she gave up custody. And also, he had possession of an affidavit that had been given by a man named Alex Fields. And I had heard this name as one of the DNA. They had gotten DNA from him, and he was one of the comparative samples, and I was like, who is that? Well, he had given this affidavit, and I want you to hear Zach reading this affidavit.
Would you please read the second paragraph of this affidavit?
I was at Hall's Chop House in downtown Greenville, South Carolina, when a woman approached me. She said hello and proceeded to ask if I was looking for a date. She said something to the effect of inviting me to bed for an amount of money and that we would not be rushed at all. When I refused her proposition, she proceeded to offer me narcotics. I refused and ended the encounter at that point.
Would you please read just the first sentence of the third paragraph?
There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that this woman is the woman that I saw on Craigslist.
And Zach, again, the woman in this advertisement on Craigslist, who's that woman?
Christina Parcell.
Interesting. Yep. So in May of 2021, John Mello asks Zach, would you kill Christina for $5,000? Would you murder her? And he's like, he said, I was insulted. He says, no, I would not do that. And then later on, he makes him another offer. If you were convinced that everything I'm telling you is true, and that, he didn't say what it was, everything I'm telling you, would you do it for $10,000? He's like, no. At some point, he makes a statement that he believed that Brad Post was a pedophile or is a pedophile. That's how he said it. He was a pedophile or is a pedophile. Then in June of 2021, he was getting really stressed out from doing all these practicing and recording. And John says, hey, take a break, come to Italy. So he goes over to Italy for a visit. He sees the child. And he says she just looked nothing like she did before. She had gained 20 pounds. This is an 8-year-old. She had gained 20 pounds in a very short amount of time. She, her demeanor was, lack of spirit, depressed. Her spunk just was not there anymore. And he said it was like she was trying to be stronger than she should be for an 8-year-old at that age. But he knew she was being tortured and was drowning. And he goes on to admit, yes, I'm the one that sent the mailers. I was doing it because I wanted to make sure that, he was trying to help out. He wanted to make sure the guardian had all the information, that the police had all the information, that, he wanted to make sure everybody had this information. And he said, I kept becoming more and more concerned, extremely concerned, because nothing would come of it. To the point where he even called CPS, Child Protective Services, and said, hey, I saw this child being abused by her mother, physically and mentally or verbally abused by the mom, which he said he totally made up. But his hope was that they would go and interview the child, and this would give the child an opportunity to say what was really going on. That didn't happen. So now he's really getting concerned because nobody's doing anything for this child. He even here's how he said it to the jury. Because he wanted to give the child a way to talk to DCFS and tell them her mother was sexually abusing them. Objection. The jury was asked to disregard that. And someone in the courtroom said the jury was pretty stunned by that statement. They were looking out to the audience because the audience wasn't stunned because they already knew it. But they were pretty stunned by this. So now they know. Cat's out of the bag. By the time he gets back from Italy, in June 2021, he's convinced that the child was being sexually abused by Christina. So they send the jury out. He's admonished by the judge. He's like, you're not allowed to talk about this. The state argued, listen, he's intentionally trying to taint the jury, and so I wanted a curative instruction. I'm not going to ask for a mistrial, but I want a curative instruction. So the judge brings the jury back in and says disregard. Okay. So at this point, he concluded there was no other way to rescue this child than to murder Christina Parcell. So then he was asked by his attorney, did you take Christina Parcell's life? Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I believed it was absolutely necessary, and I was right. He thought the child was in danger. So he had said, I give it a lot of thought, a lot of planning. He went to a gun show. He buys a gun. He buys a knife. He tries to put a silencer on the gun and then realizes it's not really, it won't work on a .22 revolver that he bought. He had gotten a job on an international cruise ship, and he was getting ready to leave for this job and planned to commit the murder on October 12th because he felt like he couldn't leave her unprotected. Like he just couldn't leave her. He said, I've had a really good life and I can't just leave this child in the situation that she was in. He felt like it had to be well planned because if he failed, things would be worse off for the child. So then he talks about what went into the planning. He found a route from the mountain house to Canebrake, which is the road that Christina lived on. But then when October 12th came around, he was having second thoughts. He was like, oh, he says, it just didn't feel right. Didn't want to do it that day. He had gotten information from John Mello about where people were going to be that day, what times the child was going to be in school, that Christina had a job interview that morning. So he knew all that. So on October 13th, he leaves the mountain house. He says, later than I wanted to, 8:15. He leaves in his Ford Ranger. He's got the bicycle in the back of the truck. He says, I was wearing the clothes that you've seen described. But he says, on the way, I was sick from the stress. He says, I thought I was going to vomit. I was shaking so hard. I thought I was going to have to stop the car because I couldn't keep it straight on the road. But he knew that there was no other way to resolve this, to save that child. So he was asked, wouldn't the gun have been quicker than the knife? Because he bought the gun and the knife, and he said, yes, the gun would have been quicker, but he explained why he was afraid that the noise from the gun would alert neighbors and they would send over and it would be a worse situation, and he obviously didn't want to be detected. So here is his description of this crime, which ends up in that outburst you heard at the beginning of the video. Watch through this because I'm telling you, it's riveting.
I laid my bike down in the driveway and I took my backpack off and I took out the box that had been gift wrapped that had an end open. And I put the .22 revolver in that box. And I put the backpack back on my back and I took a bunch of roses and I walked up to the door and I rang the doorbell. And I was shaking and freaking out at this point because there was nowhere I wanted to be less than at that house on that morning. And when I rang the doorbell, the door opened and a woman came to the front. And I thought it was Christina Parcell, but I wanted to make sure. And I also wanted to make sure that no one else was home. So I told her that while I was holding the box and the roses, that I had a delivery for Lutina Parcell, her sister. And she told me that Lutina wasn't home. So at this point, I realized that Christina was at the house alone. And I handed her the roses. And I took the revolver out of the box and I pointed it at her and I told her to be quiet and to go back into the house, which she did. And I followed her into the house and I shut the door. And I was experiencing such anxiety that my body wasn't really doing what I was telling it to do anymore. Like when I realized that I couldn't use the gun, which was unloaded at this point, my plan had been to try to knock her unconscious because I didn't want to cause her or anyone any pain. That wasn't my intention. I just wanted to save Aida and to make sure that no one else who was a bystander would be involved in this or could be endangered in any way. So I tried, while she was holding the roses, to strike her on the head and knock her unconscious. But my body was fighting me because even though I knew who she was and what she was doing and the danger that was putting Aida in, I was still looking at her and I was seeing a sympathetic figure. I was seeing a woman, and I had always been taught never to hurt a woman, to always protect women and children. So when I went to strike her with the gun, my hand didn't really do what I was trying to tell it to. I essentially pulled my strike. It felt like a time I had been cliff jumping with friends. I have a big fear of heights, and there was a 30-foot face that you could jump off and jump into a deep pool of water. And when I would run up to the edge, I would try to get a running start and jump off the edge, and I just couldn't. Like my body would stop me against my will. And I had to try to do this 10 or 15 or 20 times before I could actually get myself to go over the edge. So when I struck her on the head with the pistol, that's what happened. It didn't knock her unconscious, and I hardly struck her at all, to be honest. So I tried again, and the same thing happened. I just couldn't bring myself to strike her. And at this point, she realized that I was hesitating, and she began to try to move herself and to get away and to fight back. And during this period of time, the roses had dropped and the petals and stems had scattered. And as I was hesitating, I realized that the situation was quickly getting out of control. And if I didn't pull myself together and act soon, this was all going to end up terribly for Aida, because what was happening to her would never be uncovered.
You heard testimony that at this time, Christina weighed 163 pounds. How much did you weigh on October the 13th?
About 160.
Go ahead.
So I realized that I was going to have to somehow force myself to do this at any cost. So I pulled out the knife I was wearing. And even though I knew I wasn't going to be able to strike her with any amount of force, I still tried. So I started striking her, though my strikes were pulled. And I think the knife made contact with her, but it wasn't stopping her, and it wasn't inflicting anything that could be a fatal blow. And she started to fight back. She realized I was hesitating, and it became a struggle. And in this struggle, all I could do was try to overcome this resistance I had towards doing this thing. Even though I knew it was right, I still had this physical and emotional resistance to doing it. So I just kept striking her until finally we fell on the floor. And at this point, I had just tried to take my mind out of it and just try to get through this and finish it as quickly as possible, because I realized that it was only becoming prolonged, and I had to do this in order to save Aida. So I don't remember how many times I struck her. I just remember that when it finished, we were on the ground, and I stopped striking her when she stopped struggling. And at this point, I stood up, and I was still freaking out, and I was in kind of a daze. And I was just trying to pull myself together and figure out what I needed to do to leave the house. And again, I wanted to make sure that I didn't leave anything behind that would connect me to it, because then I believe John would be connected to it, and it would only further put Aida in danger, because I didn't know if Christina Parcell was the only person involved in what was happening to Aida. And she wasn't. So I quickly looked around to make sure I hadn't left a mask or a glove, and I started to pick up the rose petals and realized that I just didn't have time to do that. Again, I was concerned that a neighbor might have heard the commotion and that a neighbor might come by to investigate, and I didn't want that. So I drew the blinds and I moved her body away from the door, which had windows, because I didn't want someone to come to the door and see her. And I put my things back in the backpack, and I looked in a mirror before I left to make sure everything was in order, and I saw that she had scratched my face in the struggle. And of course, I realized that this could leave DNA. So I used the paint thinner to try to clean her hands. And then I changed my mask, and I took off my outer shirt because there was blood on it. And I put it in the backpack. And at this point, I was really worried that someone, that Lutina might come back to the house, or Brad Post might come to the house, or a neighbor might come over. So I was trying to leave the house as quickly as possible. And before I left, when I realized that I had probably left my DNA there, despite my effort not to, I prayed again and just said that I believe that what I've done is the right thing, and I believe that I did it for the right reason. But if it's your will that I be connected to this, then I will turn myself in, and I will own up to what I've done, and I'll take responsibility for it, because I believed that it was the right thing. And then I left. I exited out through the door, and I got back on my bike, and I pedaled my bike back to the truck, and I drove back to the mountain house. And I was still completely freaking out, and it felt entirely surreal. But there is a big difference in how I felt, in that as soon as I left the house, I felt the most enormous wave of relief wash over me, because I knew from that moment on, Aida would be safe. Aida would be safe from the sexual abuse that her mother was perpetrating on her. And there is proof to that the state is hiding from you.
Instruct him to be quiet.
Okay, you need to stop talking. The jury.
Can you believe this? So, jury is escorted out of the courtroom. The judge actually finds Zach Hughs in contempt of court for not complying with his order and sentences him to 6 months in jail. Big deal, right? I think it was worth it for him to be able to tell the jury what's really going on here. And then they come back on the record. They're off the record for quite some time. So again, what the judge explains to the jury is, I'm the trier of facts. I decide what evidence you can consider. If I tell you to disregard something, you have to disregard it. You cannot consider it as evidence. And you can't even discuss it. So when he's telling these jurors, when you go back in that room, you're not allowed to talk about this. Christina's sexual abuse of the minor and all these photos. You're not allowed to talk about that. Okay. What? You know they're going to talk about it. Like that's the elephant in the room here. So it was during the lunch break that, I don't know when the lunch break occurred, 1 o'clock, 1:30, that the police go out and they arrest John Mello. They charge him with solicitation based on Zach's testimony that, hey, he offered me $5,000, he offered me $10,000, so solicitation, and accessory before the fact to murder. And he is brought before a magistrate last night for a bond hearing, and he's no bond for you. This man's going to run off to Italy, or of course there's going to be no bond. But we didn't even get to see the cross-examination. There's no cross-examination. That's this morning, cross-examination. And I think the state wants this guy off the stand, like, because the more he's on the stand, the more damage he's doing to the state's case. He's already admitted everything. Like, the jury has no choice now but to find him guilty of murder. But the question is, did he have a good excuse? Was this child in imminent danger? But they're not allowed to consider anything Zach said as evidence. They can't consider the fact that she was being sexually abused by mom and the boyfriend as the imminent danger. They're going to come back with guilty. But here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking it would behoove the state to work some kind of deal with Zach on the sentence, like a lesser sentence, in exchange for testimony against John Mello. Because I don't know if all that stuff he told Zach Hughs is true or not. Zach mentions that, hey, John was quite the storyteller. I knew that, but there were other things that occurred that convinced me that this was the right thing to do. The documentation that he reviewed, the photos that he saw, the websites, yeah. And we now know that Brad Post has been arrested for all of those photographs and videos that were found in his possession. So, which gives some more credence to what John Mello was saying to Zach Hughs. Anyway, we'll see how this shakes out. Have a great day, everybody. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. I know this was a long video, but well worth it. Yeah. Astonishing testimony, astonishing. So I'll recap today's testimony, and then we'll see where it goes from there. Have a great day, everybody. Take care. Bye.